So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. Because I have a dream. My four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
I think I really became aware of race big time when I started real school, because growing up as a homeschooler, a lot of the families that we did co-ops with and things like that, weren't really big media consuming dynamics. So there was this little bit of a bubble type dynamic where it wasn't really a big deal. Perspective comes into everything. I felt I really didn't like myself because I was brown. I felt like everybody else was so different. I was me and one other person maybe in the middle school that I went to were people of color, quote unquote, and I felt like it was something that was really sequestering for me. It made me, I'm different because, you know, my hair's like this when I had it, and I think I became really conscious of the fact that, you know, one of these things is not like the others in middle school. It would gradually change, going to high school and especially in athletics, even if it's just a perception, even a stereotype thing of getting a growth spurt and being good at a sport, that I really started more or less embracing being mixed as opposed to being one or the other. So my dad's white, my mom's black. I love both my parents and seeing that they both had very varied sides of their experience growing up racially, right? So my grandfather on my dad's side disowned him for marrying a black woman. I remember me and my brother Nathan were in the back of the house watching the movie Amistad, and my dad had kind of came in the room to tell us about a chore or something that he had told us to do. We hadn't done it. Sees the movie that we're watching, and he just stopped and was like, I'll come back later. And I think my parents recognized they weren't raising children of just one background. And I think for me, the identity of being mixed means that I get to kind of be the best of both worlds if I choose. And I think it's also been very preventative for me from seeing you people or those people in a certain kind of way.
So like growing up, were you around more black people, more white people? It was like the dominant culture that you was kind of kicking it with?
Especially like middle school, homeschool, earlier parts of high school was definitely more of a white Caucasian dynamic. We went to predominantly white churches. I went to 2 different private schools. So I think the big switch was playing basketball, and that was a big switch, right? Because I was going to the course in the Morningside apartment projects near where I lived. For you grew up in the...
Yeah, I did a little bit of everything. My church background, mostly black. Became a Christian in a mostly black church, grew in a mostly black church, and then sometime or another went to a predominantly white church, and they ended up sending me off to like seminary.
Okay.
And did the seminary thing for a couple years, hated it, loved what I was learning, really enjoyed what I was learning, just because the nerd in me was like, oh snap, all of these different authors, concepts and things like that I could pick up, but culturally, humongous disparity, very different feel of like, yeah, just like who I was and how I operated. it was a lot. It was a lot to be trying to like walk through and deal with, as like trying to figure out what my role is in churches, but also what my role is in fighting for injustice. And like, but it's like for some reason I'm the guy that keep hitting up. So,
well, I will say that is, I never took offense to it, but I remember there was some kind of, when I was at Queen's University, there was, I don't know if something had happened, but they had a diversity council, and you know, there wasn't a whole lot of people in that space that you could put on there, and you kind of get the, you know, we're now going to go, Jim, to the voice of Brown with Ty Farley. I'm like, I don't speak for every circumstance or every issue that's tied to, you know, race or some kind of, especially when it's like an element around unrest, right? Like,
and then the whole idea of diverse is you can't broad stroke that. It's going to be nuanced. It's going to be different across the board. And so it's like, I think they were always trying to figure out like how to make it good for everybody, white, black, and brown, and like all these different backgrounds. But it's like, there's no one way that a black person is made. There's no one way that a white person is made. The cultures are different.
yeah.
But like, man, depending on what you expose certain people to, you might get a different thought process, or a different like type of black person, or a different type of white person.
Well, just everything swirling around, I think I got to give this perspective when we have someone else join in the conversation, someone who's Caucasian joins the dynamic. I think it obviously changes, especially when we're talking about different dynamics of ethnicity and race. And I always feel like there's the tension in the conversation becomes our own perceptions of what the other person's thinking based on the fact that, you know, he's wearing this kind of clothes and I'm wearing this, and I look like this and you look like this. And I mean, right now, right, it almost feels like this, right? Like there's almost two of us,
yeah.
like, yeah, tell us how you feel, as opposed to be like, hey, I'm a dude too.
Yeah.
And I'm not any more historically guilty of something or been on something than he is in terms of us just both having a here and now conversation. But I think our culture is really pushing things hard that way.
One of the things for me is I think there can be a tension that lives underneath that can really shape and shift how conversations feel. Maybe not actually what's always said, but maybe how it feels. And so I think for me, sometimes I get timid, honestly. I get timid about kind of maybe sharing a perspective, or just not wanting to be, right, overly insensitive. And so what's the assumption, if you will, right or wrong, that black and brown men have of white men coming into a conversation? Is it an assumption of there's an agenda, there's a bias? I mean,
Good question.
Just
On my end, definitely there's an agenda. With the climate of where things is now, I can't tell you how many text messages or DMs I'm getting for all of a sudden white dudes wanting black friends.
I just want you to know how much you matter to me, bro.
Yeah, you matter, but it's like I mattered before you agreed to it.
To me, it's like I don't feel attention based on the fact that it's a white guy talking to me or joining a conversation or whatever else. Maybe you could chalk that up to being a mixed kid.
Yeah.
The things I want to be mindful of is like, well, you did grow up in a predominantly white culture, you know. Maybe it's a little easier for you to navigate those waters because there's a level of familiarity that I don't think white America has with black America, not out of some insidious kind of racism, but just like a lack of exposure. It probably would eliminate some of the tension of like, hey, it's not because I don't like you, it's just, I don't know you as well.
Yeah.
And now, starting lineups for your Queen's University Royals. 6'7". In your program. They always give you like 2 or 3 inches and 20 pounds.
Bro, I think my coach said I was like 6'4".
Yeah. And I think as a mixed kid, the frustration is to only be perceived based on one side of your makeup. And I think my curiosity is like, what is it like to have the perceptions be very specific to everything that you are?
In thinking about this side of town that I serve on, I'm serving all these different people that live on this one side of town. Most of the time are Black, and stories are unheard, narratives are unknown. The misconception is that a lot of times is that they want to be there, or that it's their fault. And then we still have this like pull yourself up by like bootstraps idea, as well as just the misconception that like Black is just like one thing, one way of being. And it's just like, man, you strip a lot of Black people from their humanity, making them seem like they're one way. So I know that's said a few different misconceptions, but yeah.
Yeah, it's important because misconceptions become bridge breakers, right? And I think they live on both sides, misconceptions. But and like I would say, I think one of the frustrating bridge breaking assumptions, misconceptions about a white guy.
Yeah.
One is that I haven't worked hard in my life, right? That, hey, maybe there was all this stuff was handed somehow. And I look back and go, man, I worked really hard. I worked really hard in my life. And so I think sometimes it can be really frustrating and get defensive if the assumption is, oh, you didn't have to work hard at life, or I think another thing that's a misconception is that all white people have one opinion about what race relationships should look like, right? Or the belief that all white people are comfortable with the status of how our country is being run. I mean, like that we don't want change or growth as a nation. I think sometimes so I think some of those misconceptions personally become hard because I feel like, hey, I have a hopefully valuable opinion. I want to weigh in. I want to listen. But I also can have a perspective. And I think sometimes it can feel like right now, maybe the white perspective is invalid.
I when it comes to like narrative misconceptions about biracial people, I don't really know of a lot, right? What I'm saying? I think that, some of the things that you mentioned about that I can empathize with in terms of well, you're Black, there's an assumed level of being okay with certain states or a lack of expectation. For me, candidly, like I used to be resentful of that. I probably had 3 or 4 situations with like teachers where if I turned in a paper where they pulled me aside after class and wanted to tell me how seriously the institution took plagiarism. Because your assumption is that the basketball player with earrings can't write it. You know what I'm saying? Like, flip side would be my dad, who's white, was riding the bus to work a lot, and the tension that was on that bus, because to your point, the perception of him being a white man of a certain age, none of y'all know that he's poured out his life being a father to some brown kids and a lover to a Black woman and all these different, dynamics that have been his life, right? So I think the being mixed misconception that I probably am the most frustrated by is that the assumption that I'm only going to see things based on the fact that I am brown, right? Like, well, you're outwardly presenting African-American male, so you should be on this side of this issue because, well, you are you or aren't you Black? This stuff.
So if misconception or stereotypes are one of the things that break down, right, racial relationships, what are bridge builders?
I'd say,
conversation.
In I think healthy dialogue. I don't think we've touched on too much real controversial elements in this conversation necessarily, right? But when those things do get brought up, having the ability to talk to someone and maybe even vehemently disagree with where they're coming from, without it turning into like, well, you just say that because you're just a white dude, so of course you would be able to do that.
My own downfall is that I don't always want to build that relationship. And I think that's the reality of a lot of human beings right now is that, man, like building a relationship right now across cultural barriers is like extremely difficult because whether you want to like say it or not, it's a lot less fun than what it could have been a year ago. Because right now everybody's guarded. I'm guarded. like everybody's a little bit guarded right now, white or black. But I think if you can find a way to not politicize someone, your relationship with someone.
Yeah, it feels like we're in a time where the conversation is at the surface, but it's also one of the hardest times to have the conversation at the exact same time, right? Because it's up and out, but then feels like it can't talk about it, right? Because it's too volatile, right?
You say one thing.
They're like, man, be honest.
Yeah.
But
You don't want that.
Yeah.
You can't handle it.
like there's gonna be like consequences and repercussions for your honesty right now. And it's like, because I think like the reason why they want you to be honest sometimes is not for the best interest in heart. Like it's not for reconciliation's sake.
Sure. Yeah.
Like,
Right. Like of all the time now to have a platform to build to bridge, if that's what's really if the real desire is for things to be equal, for people to really be treated as human beings, the weaponization of this stuff seems to be what's actually really happening, right?
I understand that the white community has had missteps and there's work to be done, right? For sure, in terms of the dynamic in relationships. But given the fact that there are a lot of mistakes, what have you guys seen as positive things, right? Things that have helped bridge the gap, have been really positive, very tangible, right? That you can look at or reflect on.
Man, the most helpful conversation I've had with a white dude recently on things, whatever the case may be, practical step, dude did his homework. He did his homework before he even asked me a question. So then the question was more informed. I truly believe well-researched, like a well-researched, like white dude that's really read up on like social justice and read the right authors also, like reading Frederick Douglass, like autobiography, reading stuff from James Baldwin, reading things from these authors that like were about like really like reconciling and unifying humanity across cultural and racial barriers. Like, man, doing your homework makes the conversation easier to have, also safer to have, because now I can trust that you've already put in the work that I'm gonna tell you to do anyway. That, to me, that would be the biggest practical step and the most helpful thing that has like happened for me as a black dude across that. So
I think active listening has always been, as corny as it sounds, and I know we talked earlier about like getting the flood of text messages from our white friends and whatever else. I wonder how many white guys have gotten texts from their black friends saying, hey man, I want you to know that whatever's going on in our culture right now, you know what I'm saying? It needs to be, if you want to be accepted as equals in a discourse or whatever else, it means that, and then I'm open and willing to be transparent. It's crazy that the cliches are so true, right? Like, or the commonly heard, like, treat people how you want to be treated. Yeah, but what should we do?
It's almost like Jesus said that.
Yeah, just do that, right? Like, it would be, just listen. Yeah, I know that's cool, but like, what should we really be doing to foster racial unity? Well, people are different. Give someone the same latitude that you'd want to be given on a topic if it was you, right? Like, don't crucify people for the sins of their forefathers as opposed to, now if you like that right now, well, we got then that's different, right? Then that's different.
Because also, man, I think what we're also talking about is like balance, right? Like having a good balanced view of like what happened back then and how that informs what's happening right now, and then being able to like talk about this.
It lets everybody take the guns from under the table and just put them up here and be like, okay, I'm good, right? Because that's really how it feels a lot of times.
That's how the conversation feels a lot right now, right? Yeah. And particularly, I'd say as a white man, it's like, I feel like I walk in the car and like every gun's pointed at me, right? And it's almost like, what did I do? I mean, I want to listen, but it's hard, right?
And then don't bag on somebody's transparent whatever else, right? Like, well, yeah, of course you feel like that because you're white fragility that makes you. No, that's awkward. If you come into a conversation, everybody's already ganged up on you and you haven't said anything yet.
Nobody likes that.
You don't like that being the only black guy in a boardroom? Well, I feel like everybody in this room is looking at me like, you don't feel good, do it. But, right, So validate why you're supposed to be here.
Yeah, so it's like, what does it look like to be like hospitable to like the elephant in the room and like having that conversation that ain't so easy.
It's
So-
like, I mean,
Hospitable to the elephant.
You have to you have to do that. Like, and that's, so spending a few years in seminary, on that campus, I was maybe one of 10 black dudes. And we have to be hospitable to the rest of the campus. They want to understand, they want to like get a hold of what's happening around us. But like, man, like we also got to do a good job of like saying, all right, yo, we can talk about it. Like it's safe here. And I think that's another practical step that I guess minorities, people of color, whatever the case may be, that we actually we got to find ways to do that. And which like, it's probably gonna sound really weird to like hear that broadly, because they were like, oh, we've been doing that. A lot of times we haven't. You know what I mean? What does it look like to have Dustin over my house and just like, yo, just ask away, bro.
If I want to be the Martin Luther King Jr. standard, the content of my character, not the color of my skin, that has to be applicable both ways. I can't just sit here cross-armed on my side of the divide and now, because the pendulum of public opinion is my way, say now you come and whatever. No, it has to, otherwise you're just reversing the dynamic that you're trying to rise above from before. And if we're not doing that, then what is your real aim? Someone told me that transparency isn't necessarily vulnerability. And part of the things that are required for any good relationship, whether it's with your significant other or whatever else, is that being vulnerable. And I think as more people watch things like this, as more people walk a mile with someone else in their space and are actually vulnerable as well as transparent, then there's the scalable element of the dynamic that the three of us had today, right? Three guys who didn't know each other from Adam, frankly. I'd have a beer with either one of you guys. Or a non-alcoholic beverage if the seminary doesn't permit it. But, okay, there we go. Yeah, I think that'd be dope.
You know, I think it's interesting, people talk about what was Jesus' ministry. It says he walked around a lake with 12 guys for 3.5 years, right? I think there's something about walking with someone, right? We walk next to each other for a while, conversation happens, right? Hopefully we listen, we can grow from that, So it's good to walk together. It's not always easy, but it's good to walk together.
So even following what you said, I think walking with each other is worth it. I think it's like to be patient with each other is worth it. To get to know each other is worth it. And like you'll see the reconciliation for it. You'll see the unity for it. So no matter where we come from, man, that like we're worth being known.
Fellas, that was
awesome
just purely on its own. That was dope, man. I love conversations like that. Mics and cameras or not.